Alright guys, Murph's here, and today I want to talk about this, a Heritage Manufacturing Rough Rider, chambered in 22 long rifle and 22 Magnum. Now, eagle-eyed viewers of the channel will remember that I've actually already previously reviewed the Heritage Manufacturing Rough Rider revolver as part of the Friendly Fire series. I reviewed a 4 3/4 inch example. As we can see here, this is not a 4 3/4 inch barrel. This is a 9-inch barrel. And actually, the gun out of my personal collection. This gun also made an appearance in the Friendly Fire series episode as well. So today we're actually kind of just doing a revisit of this particular revolver, going over a couple of other aspects of this handgun. This, if anything, is a long-term review because I've had access to this firearm for over 20 years. So you could say that I've got a few rounds through it in that time period. All right, guys. So with that, why don't we go ahead and talk about some of the features of this particular handgun. Now, the 9-inch barrel. How much of a benefit is this over the 4 3/4 inch barrel? Because we're not going to do a super deep dive into the features of this particular handgun, guys. We're going to pick out a couple of things that have stood out to me over kind of what has effectively become long-term testing of this gun. So if you're wanting the features of the Heritage Rough Rider, you should check out the original video. I'll put a link in the description. But the 9-inch barrel, how much of a benefit is it? Because these guns are made in as short as 3-inch barrels and as long as 16 inches. So this kind of being a little bit of a middle ground, how does this thing perform with it, features-wise? Well, one of the complaints that I leveraged against the 4 3/4 inch barrel was that I found the sights to be very indistinct. That when shooting at a 4-inch steel plate at 75 yards, I could not connect with it. Whereas I was shooting a 9mm handgun on the same day and was having fairly repeatable hits. It wasn't like 1 for 1, but I was getting at least a couple of hits out of each string. Now, that's not surprising when you consider that, first off, we have this gutter type rear sight and a blade type front sight and a fairly short barrel. So everything's kind of really squished together, and something that might at first glance look to be very small, whenever you're trying to line up on especially a small target at distance, a lot of that front sight is going to cover that target. That's just something you have to work around with that. But when I lengthen the sight radius out another just over 4 inches, how does that play into being able to draw a bead on a target? And in all actuality, guys, the front sight does thin out just a little bit whenever it is that you do get a longer sight radius. Now, normally in handguns, I don't get that concerned about sight radius because whenever we're talking about combat handguns, a lot of people are talking about the difference between like 3.5 inches and 5 inches when it comes to sight radius. If you have good sights, it's really not that big of a deal. It doesn't help out that much. However, on something that is already kind of indistinct, because these are not high visibility sights by any means, this does kind of help out a little bit to get a little bit thinner of a front sight. I'm pretty sure both front sights between these two handguns are the same width. However, with it being a little bit further out, just like anything that you look at a distance is going to be a little bit smaller, that's kind of how I perceive the sights on this particular handgun. Now, most people will tell you that you're going to get higher velocity with longer barrels, and in most sealed systems, that would work out. But that is probably, and I don't have a chronograph to be able to confirm these findings, but from what I'm understanding, and it makes a lot of sense, that is not the case with revolvers. And that is because you have a gap right here between the cylinder and the forcing cone. Now, something to keep in mind whenever it is that we're talking about bullets in general. We're talking about a little tiny contained explosion every time the gun goes off. So the primer gets impinged, and that sparks our propellant. Our propellant starts to burn and creates expanding gases, which is a low explosive. Now, those expanding gases push against everything that they're being contained by. And the bullet is the first thing that's going to give way. And then those pressures, those expanding gases, continue to propel that bullet down the barrel because it's the only thing that's giving up. If for some reason the cartridge casing bounced out of the back of it, the gases would vent out that direction instead of continuing to push the bullet because there's more friction in that direction. It's kind of like water. It's going to go the path of least resistance. Now, when you have cylinder gap, you have a constant flow of those gases still escaping out of the back. Now, they're expanding rapidly enough that they're continuing to push that projectile, but if this gap was any larger, that could really change that dynamic. kind of the same thing whenever you're talking about gas-driven semi-automatic systems, be it gas piston or direct gas impingement. It doesn't really matter. Those gases get tapped off through a hole in the barrel to be able to run the action. Now, as long as that system is plugged up, the gases will continue to push against whatever surfaces in order to function the action up until the bullet exits. So, with that being the case, actually the longer barrel you have in a .22 revolver, the more gas leakage you're going to have. It was a really long explanation and story to tell you that a 9-inch barrel is not necessarily going to have more velocity than a 4 3/4 inch barrel. So, something to keep in mind there. Now, something else to keep in mind, guys, and I pointed this out before, there's a little screw that retains our ejector rod housing here. Come through every once in a while, make sure those are still tight, give them like a little wiggle test. They do have a tendency to come loose. Maybe a little spot of super glue would help with that. Now, this handgun, as I mentioned before, I've been shooting off and on for like 20 years now. This was something that my dad bought when my brother and I were kids to kind of capture that like Wyatt Earp feeling, because he and I were both really into Tombstone at the time. So this was supposed to be kind of like our Wyatt Earp butt line. But, of course, this is Chevron 22 and is way less expensive than any of the commemorative bunt lines that have come out over the years. Now, with that being the case, what are the differences between this and the gun that I discussed previously? Well, this handgun actually predates Heritage Manufacturing being purchased by Taurus. So there are a couple of minor differences between the two, the most noteworthy of which is the texturing on this hammer. Here we can see that I have serrations cut into it. On the newer guns, it's actual checkering, which between the two, I prefer the actual checkering, but based on the shape of the hammer, you really don't need it. It's already a really nice ledge in order to allow your thumb to get in there and make sure that the gun reliably turns and all that kind of stuff. Now, something else that I noticed is that on the other Heritage that I reviewed, whenever you rotated the cylinder, you had distinct clicks. However, as we can see here, I do not have that on this revolver. Now, here's the deal. I've been shooting this for so long that I don't remember if it ever clicked to begin with. Now, a couple things that I have noticed is that I do not have any turn in the cylinder whenever it is that the gun is at full cock. So I don't necessarily think it's an issue with the latching system of the revolver. This could very well just be that this handgun was not designed with those clicks in mind to begin with. Or they have worn away over time and that it's just not affected the other functions of the revolver. I leave that up to you. I really wish I could remember for sure. All right, now, as you can see, this gun is in black. These grips are in Coco Polo. You can get these in a wide variety of prints and finishes on both the grips and the receiver. I'm not into that. I prefer solid neutral tones on my firearms. Black, gray, maybe, FDE or something along those lines. I'm not a big fan of like prints. It just doesn't do it for me. It makes a firearm seem too much like a toy, and I'm not a fan of, serious items kind of coming across as toys. Now, something else that I will say between this handgun and the one previously reviewed is that this has a much lighter trigger. There is absolutely no take up. You are right on the wall. This gun is ready to go. So I imagine that's just kind of been smoothed out over the years and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is a convertible gun. This also does come with a .22 long rifle cylinder, as we can see right here. I have the .22 Magnum in currently. And actually, the way that you can tell that, and this is kind of interesting, is that the .22 long rifle cylinders have flutes. The .22 Magnum cylinders do not. So at a glance, you can pretty much tell whether or not you have a .22 long rifle or .22 mag cylinder into the gun. It's also marked on the cylinders, but if you're just looking for a really quick visual cue, that's how you know, so that you can check and make sure that either yourself or others are loading this gun properly with the cartridges that are actually supposed to go in it. All right, guys, that's features. Why don't we go ahead and discuss some shooting aspects of this gun over the other. All right, now, like I said, I have shot this for a long time. I can tell you right now, as much as the other gun did not recoil, this, with all this barrel out front, doesn't move at all. It's very easy to keep this thing on target and just chew out the center of targets, which, when you consider that 22 long rifle is a pretty small cartridge, it takes a lot to be able to chew out the center of a target with one, but you can do that with this handgun. This thing is amazing. 22 Magnum, same kind of deal. Not a lot of recoil, definitely more expensive cartridge, but it is an absolute joy to shoot with either cartridge. Now, something else here over the years there, guys. A while back, I noticed that one of the screws in this grip had fallen out, and I had not even noticed. I couldn't even tell you when it is that it occurred. This was a couple of years ago. So I continued to shoot the handgun because I didn't notice any real issue with wobble or any, the gun still turned and passed all the function checks and all that kind of stuff. So I wasn't that worried about it. A couple of years go by and I look at the bottom of the gun and the other screw behind the trigger guard here had fallen out. And again, I checked the gun for wobble and did a functions check and all that kind of stuff, and still no issues. So I continued to shoot this gun off and on up until a couple of weeks ago when I finally went ahead and ordered the screws to be able to fix this thing. So, when it comes to long-term durability of these firearms, I would say that they're pretty durable. And when you consider that you're talking about just over $150 for one of these, that's really hard to beat. This is a time-tested and durable little handgun, for sure. From a simple and time-tested design being based upon the Colt Peacemaker. All right, now some other accessories that I've gotten for the gun also includes this holster. This is actually from Heritage Manufacturing, which is one of the few people that I found that actually provides a holster long enough to be able to handle a 22 revolver. You can find stuff for the larger chambered guns, but 22 revolvers are a little bit more difficult to find something for. All right, guys, so with that, what are my recommendations when it comes to this handgun? Would I recommend this for duty type use? Still, absolutely not. Not even a little bit, not even if there's a fire. This is just in 100 different ways not a legitimate choice for any type of duty use. What about self-defense use? Again, no. Not even a little bit, not even if there's a fire. Especially when you talk about how light this single action trigger is and all that kind of stuff, and the fact that it's a single action gun to begin with, and it's chambered in 22 long rifle. This has everything set against it to be a horrific choice for home defense. And if you're looking for a discussion on 22 long rifle and 22 Magnum, kind of in conjunction with their suitability for self-defense, I have videos on those. The links will be in the description. Okay, well, what about a competition gun? Well, if you were shooting cowboy action shooting or something along those lines, this would be a pretty inexpensive way to get into it, and also with the cost of ammunition, a pretty inexpensive way to be able to stay in the competitions. I'm not sure if cowboy action shooting has a 22 category. They should. Pretty much any type of shooting competition should have a 22 category so that people can come out and still enjoy competition with a little bit cheaper option. All right, well, what about hunting use or something along those lines? This is probably going to meet the requirement for most, like length requirements and stuff like that in most states that have handgun hunting and handgun hunting requirements. However, you also have to be very careful what it is that you're using this against. This is going to be a great option for squirrels or rabbits or something along those lines. Maybe not so great an option for deer. However, if you were talking about this as like a farm gun or something along those lines, especially if you're working in a barn or if you were working around traps or something along those lines, or just having a fun woods gun, this would be a great option for that, especially having the 22 Magnum cylinder. Checking traps, maybe having a little bit larger animal in there that you want a 22 mag to be able to put down as opposed to a 22 long rifle. And then a 22 long rifle, if you're messing around in the barn, you don't necessarily want to destroy all your stuff. All right, guys, those are my recommendations. What are my uses for this handgun? Well, I have used this a lot for hunting. I've actually taken a couple of squirrels with it. But for the most part, this has been a fun gun for me. And, so often we get really caught up in ideas like, well, this gun serves this purpose and this gun serves this purpose. And, this is my, self-defense ankle gun backup to my, super giant, whatever type of handgun. It doesn't really matter. But guns are allowed to just be fun. And that's a fantastic category whenever you're talking about a 22 single action. Just have fun. Just go out, maybe introduce somebody to the shooting sports, or just enjoy shooting at a lower cost. All right, guys, that's pretty much my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.